In the winter of 1852, when London's sky hung low and pewter-colored above the chimneys, Clara Whitfield stood beneath the blaze of 100 chandeliers and felt, for the first time in her brief marriage, profoundly alone. The ballroom of the Harrow townhouse glittered with ambition. Crystal pendants cast fractured rainbows across satin gowns. Polished floors reflected the restless shimmer of silk and jewels. Violins swelled with disciplined gaiety. Society had come to dine, to gossip, and to measure one another with the quiet arithmetic of rank and fortune. Clara, once a maid in a quieter household, now bore the title of Mrs. Edwin Harrow, yet the name rested upon her shoulders like borrowed lace, delicate, admired, and never entirely hers. She moved carefully among the guests, one gloved hand resting unconsciously against her abdomen. 9 weeks. The physician's voice still echoed in her memory, grave yet congratulatory. A child. Edwin's heir. The word had filled her with a tremulous joy, for she believed a child might anchor affection where ambition had long ago taken root. Her marriage had been swift and strategic. Edwin Harrow, a solicitor of rising influence, had seen in her modest beauty and obedient nature the polish required for advancement. Clara had seen in him escape, from service, from uncertainty, from a life spent in the shadow of other women's grandeur. Each had mistaken necessity for devotion. Mrs. Harrow, murmured a matron in violet silk, her smile sweet as preserved fruit, how pale you appear this evening. One might suspect a delicate constitution. Clara inclined her head with studied grace. Merely the warmth of the room, madam. The lie tasted of iron. Already she sensed the scrutiny. A maid elevated too quickly invites inspection. A woman who glows with private happiness invites suspicion. Across the room, Edwin conversed with 2 gentlemen near the doorway of his study. His posture was impeccable, his expression animated, yet his gaze slid past Clara as though she were an ornament already accounted for. She had meant to tell him tonight, to draw him aside, to place his hand upon her waist and whisper the news that would secure their future. She imagined surprise softening his features, imagined pride. The orchestra shifted to a waltz. Laughter rose like startled birds. Clara excused herself, her breath shortening beneath the press of perfume and heat. She would tell him now before courage deserted her. The corridor beyond the ballroom lay in comparative shadow, lit by a single gas lamp that flickered against walnut paneling. At the far end stood the heavy door to Edwin's study, slightly ajar. Voices filtered through the narrow opening. I assure you, Edwin was saying, his tone low and edged with calculation, this complication was unforeseen. A second voice, older and amused, replied, marriage often presents such inconveniences. Clara's hand hovered inches from the door. She should have knocked. She should have announced herself with dignity. Instead, she paused, arrested by the curious chill that crept along her spine. It cannot be mine. 5 words, spoken without hesitation. The air altered. The corridor seemed to tilt, as though the house itself recoiled. Clara's fingers pressed against the wall to steady herself. She waited. Surely there would be laughter, some correction, a clarification that would mend the wound before it fully opened. None came. You understand, Edwin continued, voice sharpening, a child so early invites speculation. I will not have my assent impeded by whispers of impropriety. Speculation. Impropriety. The syllables struck with surgical precision. Clara felt her joy unravel, thread by luminous thread. 9 weeks. She counted backward in her mind with desperate clarity. There had been no absence, no betrayal. Only a marriage bed entered with dutiful obedience. The accusation was not born of doubt but convenience. He sought to shield himself, from responsibility, from scandal, from the burden of affection. Footsteps shifted within the study. Clara retreated soundlessly down the corridor, her heart pounding not with hysteria but with a terrible lucidity. She understood, in that suspended moment, the architecture of her marriage. Edwin had not married her for love. He had married her for presentation. A pregnant wife complicated presentation. She returned to the ballroom with composure restored by sheer force of will. The chandeliers still blazed. The violins still sang. No one marked the alteration within her, yet everything had changed. When Edwin emerged minutes later, his expression serene, he crossed the floor to her side. You have been absent, he observed lightly. The air was close, she replied. His gaze lingered upon her face, assessing as though measuring whether she had overheard. Whatever he sought he did not find. Clara had learned long ago that survival often depends upon silence. A gentleman approached to request her hand for the dance. Before she could respond, another voice intervened, deep, resonant, carrying without effort across the music. If Mrs. Harrow is unclaimed, I would consider it an honor. Clara turned. Lord Alexander Ashbourne stood before her, his dark coat severe against the shimmer of the room. He was not a frequent visitor to Edwin's gatherings, his rank exceeded their circle. Yet his eyes, steady and perceptive, rested upon her with unsettling attention. Edwin hesitated only a fraction of a second before forcing a smile. "By all means, my lord." Ashbourne extended his hand. Clara placed her gloved fingers within his, aware of Edwin's watchful stare. As they moved into the waltz, Ashbourne's voice lowered, private amid the swirl of silk. "You are unwell, Mrs. Harrow?" "I assure you, my lord, I am quite recovered." Recovered implies injury. The music carried them in measured turns. Clara met his gaze and found no mockery there, only a searching gravity that unsettled her composure more than Edwin's cruelty had done. She looked away first. "One must endure trifles," she said. "Some trifles," Ashbourne replied quietly, "are sharpened into weapons." The words brushed too near the truth. For a fleeting instant, Clara wondered how much he perceived. The dance concluded, applause scattered politely. Ashbourne bowed, yet his eyes did not release hers. "Should you require assistance of any kind," he said, voice pitched for her alone, "I trust you will remember that not all judgments are just." Edwin reclaimed her at once, his fingers cool against her wrist. "You seem fatigued," he murmured. "Perhaps you should retire early." Perhaps he feared further observation. Perhaps he feared her silence. Clara inclined her head, obedient as ever. Yet as she withdrew from the light, she felt the first ember of something unfamiliar kindle beneath her grief. Not rebellion, not yet, but awareness. The child within her was innocent of ambition and suspicion. It deserved more than calculation. From the landing above, she paused and looked down upon the glittering assembly. Edwin laughed too loudly. Lord Ashbourne watched the staircase. And Clara, pressing her palm against the life no one else acknowledged, understood that 5 quiet words had not merely shattered her marriage, they had declared a war she had never intended to fight. Morning arrived without gentleness. A thin winter light pressed itself through the tall windows of the Harrow townhouse, revealing the ballroom's abandoned splendor, wilted petals crushed into the carpet, glasses left clouded with unfinished champagne, the faint scent of perfume clinging like memory. Clara had not slept. She had lain awake listening to Edwin's measured breathing beside her, wondering how a man could rest so peacefully after dismantling another's faith with 5 indifferent words. At breakfast he spoke of legal briefs and parliamentary rumors, never once meeting her eyes. His composure was immaculate, yet it carried a new sharpness as though he were rehearsing distance. When she lifted her teacup, her hand trembled despite her resolve. "You seem unsettled," he remarked without concern. "I find myself reflective," she replied. "Reflection is best reserved for mirrors, my dear. The world rewards forward motion. Forward motion. Advancement. Reputation." He uttered these words as though they were sacred virtues. Clara studied him across the linen-draped table and saw not a husband but an architect, carefully dismantling any structure that threatened his ascent. The child within her had become an inconvenience in his design. Before she could summon courage to confront him, a servant entered bearing a small parcel wrapped in dove-gray paper. Edwin's brows knit faintly. "For Mrs. Harrow," the servant announced. Clara accepted it with quiet curiosity. No card accompanied the package, only a slender ribbon sealing its folds. Edwin watched as she untied it. Inside lay a brooch of remarkable delicacy, a silver swallow in mid-flight, its wings outstretched as if defying gravity. The craftsmanship was exquisite yet restrained. "How curious," Edwin murmured. "An admirer, perhaps?" His tone suggested danger beneath levity. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from guilt but from indignation. She knew instinctively who had sent it. Lord Ashbourne's gaze the previous evening had carried intention, not impropriety. "It appears unsigned," she answered evenly. "Indeed." Edwin's mouth curved faintly. "London delights in mystery. One must be cautious not to encourage it." Cautious. The word lingered like a warning. Clara closed her fingers around the brooch, sensing that the gesture was less a romantic overture than a declaration. Someone had seen her humiliation and refused to ignore it. By noon the first whispers had begun. A neighbor called under the pretense of charity, her curiosity poorly disguised. Servants exchanged knowing glances in corridors. Clara recognized the pattern. Scandal does not erupt. It seeps, gathering force until denial becomes futile. Edwin departed for his chambers with unusual haste, leaving her alone within walls that now felt observant. The afternoon brought a formal invitation to a luncheon hosted by Lady Penhest, a woman whose gatherings thrived upon subtle cruelty. Attendance would signal normalcy. Absence would confirm suspicion. Clara chose to attend. The luncheon unfolded beneath gilded ceilings and polite smiles sharpened by inquiry. Conversation drifted toward domestic felicity, then veered, as Clara anticipated, toward the precariousness of modern marriages. "One hears," Lady Penhest observed, her voice sweet as sugared almonds, "that early blessings may sometimes arrive with uncertainty." A murmur rippled around the table. Clara felt every gaze settle upon her, measuring reaction. She could deny the implication, protest her innocence, or maintain composure. She chose the latter. "Blessings," she replied calmly, "require no defense." The remark might have faded into the clatter of cutlery had not a chair scraped decisively against the floor. Lord Ashbourne rose from his seat at the far end of the table. His presence at such a gathering surprised many. His intervention stunned them. "Indeed," he said, his tone courteous yet resonant. "Speculation is a fragile instrument, and when misused, it wounds the hand that wields it." Silence fell heavy and absolute. Lady Penhest's smile faltered. "We meant no offense, my lord." "I am certain," he replied, though his gaze remained unwavering. Clara's pulse quickened. His defense was not flamboyant, it was deliberate. In protecting her reputation, he risked entanglement in her controversy. That risk was not lost upon the room. After the meal, as guests dispersed into smaller clusters, Ashbourne approached her without hesitation. "I trust you are unharmed," he said quietly. "Your intervention was unnecessary," she answered, though gratitude trembled beneath the words. "Unnecessary?" His eyes softened. "Madam, injustice flourishes when those who perceive it remain still." The simplicity of his conviction unsettled her more deeply than Edwin's suspicion had done. She had grown accustomed to navigating hostility alone. Assistance felt both dangerous and relieving. "You place yourself in peril of gossip," she warned. "Then let gossip occupy itself with me," he replied. "It has fatigued you sufficiently." The carriage ride home unfolded in reflective silence. Clara turned the silver swallow over in her gloved palm, tracing its wings with her thumb. A swallow returns, she remembered from childhood tales. It survives storms and finds its way back to warmth. The symbolism pierced her resolve. Upon her arrival, Edwin awaited in the drawing room, newspaper in hand. He did not rise. "I understand you attracted attention today," he began coolly. "Attention sought me," she answered. "And Lord Ashbourne, ever gallant, positioned himself at your defense." She met his gaze steadily. "He objected to unkindness." Edwin folded the newspaper with precise deliberation. "You would do well to remember that my career cannot withstand unnecessary controversy. I advise restraint." Restraint. As though she had courted humiliation. As though her pregnancy were a theatrical indulgence. "You doubt the child?" she said quietly. He did not flinch. "I doubt the timing." The cruelty of the distinction struck deeper than denial itself. Clara felt something within her shift, not shatter as before but harden. "That doubt," she replied, "belongs to you alone." For the first time, Edwin's composure cracked. "You would defy me?" "I would defend myself." The exchange hung between them like drawn steel. He turned away, dismissing her with a gesture that once would have silenced her. It did not now. That evening, as twilight seeped into the corners of the house, another parcel arrived, this time accompanied by a single line written in elegant script. Courage often arrives quietly. No signature adorned the note, yet none was required. Clara stood by the window, the brooch fastened at her collar, watching the street lamps ignite one by one. She understood the danger of accepting Ashbourne's protection. Society would not distinguish between defense and desire. Yet she also understood the greater danger of enduring suspicion alone. Downstairs, Edwin's voice carried faintly as he dictated correspondence, already shaping a narrative to preserve himself. Clara pressed her hand once more against her abdomen, feeling the fragile promise within. 5 words had sought to erase her. Instead, they had drawn a line, between silence and selfhood, between submission and choice. And somewhere beyond the glow of the street lamps, a man of rank had decided that her name was worth defending, whatever the cost. Rain came that evening with a persistence that seemed almost deliberate, striking the windows of the Harrow townhouse in a steady percussion that denied sleep and discouraged visitors. Clara stood in the dim drawing room long after the lamps had been lit, the silver swallow pinned at her throat catching firelight with each measured breath. Edwin had not returned for dinner. A note, delivered without apology, informed her he would be occupied on urgent matters. She no longer mistook absence for necessity. Urgency, in Edwin's vocabulary, meant reputation under repair. A second letter lay unopened upon the escritoire. Its seal bore no crest, yet the handwriting was unmistakable in its elegance. She broke it with steady fingers. "Madam, circumstances press upon you with unjust force. I request the honor of a brief audience tomorrow evening at my conservatory. You shall not be compromised. I give you my word." The word lingered. In her present life, promises had become brittle things. Yet there was a gravity in Lord Ashbourne's tone that differed from Edwin's polished assurances. Edwin offered outcomes. Ashbourne offered presents. Clara understood the peril. A married woman visiting a gentleman alone, even under honorable pretense, invited interpretation. Still, something within her demanded clarity. If her husband's accusation threatened to define her, she would not navigate its consequences blindly. The following evening, cloaked in charcoal wool and escorted discreetly by carriage, she arrived at Ashbourne House as twilight surrendered to night. The estate rose from the mist like a restrained fortress, stone softened by climbing ivy, windows illuminated in disciplined symmetry. A servant received her without surprise, as though her arrival had been anticipated not with scandal but with solemn preparation. She was led not to a parlor but through a corridor of tall glass panels into a conservatory warmed by discreet braziers. Moonlight filtered through the arched ceiling, silvering the leaves of orange trees and white camellias. The air carried a fragrance both delicate and resolute. Lord Ashbourne stood beside a marble fountain at the room's center. He inclined his head with formal respect. "Mrs. Harrow, I am indebted to you for trusting my invitation." "I trust only necessity," she replied, though her tone lacked hostility. "That is often the wiser course." For a moment neither spoke. The quiet was not awkward but weighted, as though both measured the gravity of what must be addressed. Clara removed her gloves, more for steadiness than comfort. "You defend me publicly," she began. "I would know why." His gaze did not waver. "Because the accusation is false." Her breath caught, though she had not consciously doubted her own innocence. "You speak with certainty." "I possess it." The words settled between them like a drawn curtain. He stepped closer, not intrusively, but with intention. "On the evening in question," he continued, "I sought Edwin regarding a financial matter. I arrived sooner than anticipated and paused outside his study. I heard the conversation you overheard. I also heard what followed." Clara felt the world narrow to the cadence of his voice. "Your husband's associate suggested discretion." Edwin replied that doubt, once planted, often suffices. He calculated the advantage of ambiguity. The cruelty of it, so deliberate, so devoid of hesitation, reignited the wound she had struggled to cauterize. "He intends to free himself," she whispered. "He intends to secure advancement unmarred by obligation." "And you?" Her eyes lifted to his. "What do you intend, my lord?" He answered without theatrical flourish. "To ensure that truth is not sacrificed to ambition." A fragile silence followed. The fountain's water murmured softly, as though echoing unspoken emotion. Clara steadied herself against the marble rim. "You risk your own standing by intervening." "My standing," he replied, "rests upon conduct, not compliance." She studied him carefully. He was not naive. He understood the cost of entanglement. That he persisted suggested motive deeper than casual chivalry. "There is more," he said quietly. She did not flinch. "Speak it." "I have admired you since before your marriage." The confession, though gently delivered, altered the air. He did not approach her further. He did not presume familiarity. His restraint rendered the admission more powerful than any impetuous declaration. "You mistake gratitude for affection," she answered, seeking equilibrium. "I mistake nothing." His voice remained calm. "I have long respected your composure, your diligence, the grace with which you navigated circumstances not of your making. When Edwin announced his engagement, I assumed you content. I withdrew. And now? Now you stand unjustly accused. My regard compels me to act." Clara turned away, pacing slowly among the camellias. Emotion pressed upon her, not romantic fantasy but recognition. To be seen without calculation was unfamiliar and dangerous. Yet she could not allow dependence to replace independence. "My marriage remains intact," she said. "In law, yes." "And in reality?" He did not answer. The absence of denial felt heavier than accusation. A distant roll of thunder vibrated against the glass ceiling. Clara placed her palm against her abdomen, instinctively protective. "I fear not scandal," she confessed at last. "I fear raising my child where suspicion resides." Ashbourne stepped closer, stopping an appropriate distance away. No child should inherit doubt as legacy. Their eyes met fully for the first time since her arrival. In his gaze she found no impatience, no hunger for advantage, only steady resolve. "If I gather evidence of Edwin's intent," he said, "would you permit me to present it?" "To what end?" "To secure your freedom from falsehood." The word freedom struck her with unexpected force. She had married for stability. She now confronted the possibility that stability itself had been illusion. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed faintly from the corridor beyond the conservatory. Ashbourne's expression shifted, not to alarm but to caution. "You were followed?" he asked. "No." The footsteps grew nearer. A servant's voice, subdued but urgent, carried through the glass doors. "My lord, Mr. Harrow has arrived. He requests immediate audience." The name reverberated like a bell struck in warning. Clara's pulse quickened, not with fear but with dawning comprehension. Edwin had traced her carriage. He had anticipated her seeking counsel. Ashbourne offered his arm, not possessively but in solidarity. "Shall we receive him together?" "Together." The word held more promise than romance. It signified alignment. Clara inhaled slowly, feeling the fragile life within her steady as if attuned to her own resolve. "Yes," she answered. As the doors opened and Edwin's silhouette darkened the threshold, Clara understood that the quiet war ignited by 5 careless words had entered a new and perilous phase. Edwin entered the conservatory without removing his gloves, as though the very air of Ashbourne House were unworthy of direct contact. Rain clung to the shoulders of his coat, glistening beneath the lamplight. His gaze moved first to Clara, assessing, then to Lord Ashbourne, calculating. "I regret the intrusion," Edwin began, though regret did not inhabit his tone. "My wife departed without sufficient explanation." Clara felt the familiar impulse to apologize rise and dissolve within her. She stood straighter instead, one hand resting lightly against the marble fountain. "I required conversation," she said evenly. "With my lord." Edwin's brow arched. Such urgency invites misinterpretation. Ashbourne did not bristle. He merely inclined his head. Interpretation thrives where truth is withheld. Edwin's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what truth do you presume to guard?" "The truth that Mrs. Harrow has been unjustly maligned." The word hung luminous and sharp. Edwin's composure faltered for a fraction of a second before settling into practiced civility. "I have maligned no one," he replied. "I have merely exercised prudence." "By suggesting," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt, "that the child I carry is not yours." The conservatory seemed to inhale. Edwin's gaze flicked toward the servants stationed discreetly beyond the corridor, then returned to her with cool disapproval. "Such matters," he said quietly, "are not suited to public recital." "Then they should not have been uttered at all," she answered. For the first time since their marriage, Clara did not lower her eyes. Edwin regarded her as though encountering an unfamiliar adversary. Ashbourne stepped forward, measured and unhurried. "Mr. Harrow, your words have consequences beyond your convenience. Doubt, once voiced, acquires appetite." Edwin removed his gloves at last, drawing each finger free with deliberate slowness. "My concern lies with reputation. A solicitor's career is not built upon sentiment." "And a marriage?" Clara asked. He did not answer directly. "A marriage must serve mutual advantage." The simplicity of his admission severed the final thread of illusion. Clara felt no dramatic rupture, only clarity, cool and unmistakable. The man before her had never sought partnership, only utility. "You intend to cast suspicion until it absolves you of responsibility," she said. "I intend to protect my future," Edwin replied. "And sacrifice mine," she countered. Silence pressed upon them, broken only by the quiet murmur of the fountain. Ashbourne's presence beside her was steady, not possessive, a reminder that isolation was no longer absolute. "I have obtained testimony," Ashbourne said calmly. "Your associate confirmed your strategy to imply uncertainty without direct accusation." Edwin's jaw tightened. "You overstep, my lord." "On the contrary," Ashbourne answered. "I step precisely where conscience directs." Clara watched the exchange with a new awareness. This was no duel of tempers but of principles. Edwin's ambition confronted Ashbourne's integrity, and for the first time she recognized that her fate lay not in their contest but in her own decision. "I will not endure insinuation," she declared. "If you doubt me, state it openly before witnesses." Edwin's eyes flashed. "You would invite scandal?" "I would invite truth." The thunder outside intensified, rattling the glass above them. Edwin took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You presume courage, Clara, but you underestimate consequence. Society will not favor a woman who courts controversy." "Society already questions me," she replied. "Silence has not shielded me." Ashbourne's voice cut gently through the tension. "There is a gathering tomorrow evening at Penhest Hall. Your colleagues will attend. If you wish to dispel rumor, declare your faith in your wife there." Edwin stared at him incredulously. "You propose spectacle. I propose resolution." The suggestion hung daring and irrevocable. Clara felt the weight of it settle upon her shoulders. A public declaration could restore her standing, or confirm her ruin. Yet the alternative was indefinite erosion. Edwin turned to her, searching for hesitation. "You would expose us to scrutiny?" "I have been exposed since the moment you spoke those 5 words," she answered quietly. The phrase struck him visibly. He had not expected her to reference it so plainly. For an instant, uncertainty flickered across his features. "You overheard?" he said. "Yes." Understanding dawned, not tender but strategic. "Then you know I acted from caution." "I know you acted from convenience." Ashbourne did not intercede. The decision unfolded between husband and wife as it always should have. Edwin paced a short distance, then faced them both. "Very well. If declaration is demanded, I shall provide it." The concession sounded less like remorse than calculation, yet it altered the balance nonetheless. "Tomorrow," he continued, "I will affirm my confidence." Clara studied him carefully. "Without reservation?" He hesitated only a breath too long. "Without reservation." The promise felt fragile, but it was spoken. Edwin inclined his head stiffly toward Ashbourne. "You have inserted yourself boldly, my lord." "I have merely refused to withdraw," Ashbourne replied. Edwin's gaze returned to Clara, searching perhaps for contrition, perhaps for dependence. He found neither. After a moment he replaced his gloves and moved toward the exit. As the doors closed behind him, the conservatory exhaled. Clara remained motionless, absorbing the shift. The confrontation had not dissolved her marriage, yet it had stripped it of illusion. For the first time, she had demanded parity rather than permission. "You have altered the course," Ashbourne said softly. "I have altered myself," she answered. He regarded her with quiet admiration. "Tomorrow will not be gentle. I no longer require gentleness." Outside, the storm began to subside, rain softening to a steady whisper. Clara felt neither triumph nor relief, only a steadying resolve. A public declaration might restore her name, or reveal Edwin's duplicity before all. As she prepared to depart, Ashbourne offered his arm once more. She accepted, not as supplicant, but as equal. "Whatever transpires," he said, "know that your dignity precedes every rumor." She met his gaze, aware that the morrow would test not only Edwin's courage but her own. And somewhere within the quiet after the storm, Clara sensed that the 5 words which had once diminished her would soon demand reckoning beneath brighter lights than any chandelier. The following evening dawned brittle and bright, as though London itself had resolved to witness what would unfold. Frost traced the edges of carriage windows, and the sky held that pale, merciless clarity which leaves nothing softened. Clara stood before her mirror while her maid secured the final fastening of her gown, a deep blue silk chosen not for display but for steadiness. The silver swallow rested at her throat. It no longer felt like a gift, it felt like armor. Edwin waited downstairs, immaculate as ever, his cravat tied with mathematical precision. He did not offer his arm immediately. He studied her instead, perhaps measuring whether she would falter beneath scrutiny. "You understand what is required," he said quietly. "I understand what is true," she replied. Something unreadable crossed his face, irritation perhaps or reluctant respect. At last he extended his arm. She took it, not out of submission, but because the confrontation ahead demanded composure. Penhest Hall blazed with candlelight visible from the street. Carriages lined the drive in disciplined succession. Within, crystal chandeliers shimmered above a sea of silk and black coats. Conversation flowed in careful currents, punctuated by laughter too bright to be sincere. The moment Clara entered, she felt the shift, a ripple of recognition, curiosity sharpened to a point. Lady Penhest approached first, her expression cultivated into benevolent intrigue. Mrs. Harrow. We are delighted you could attend. Delight is reciprocal, Clara answered evenly. Edwin's hand at her elbow tightened almost imperceptibly. He was bracing for impact. Clara felt it too, the suspended anticipation of an audience waiting for drama. Lord Ashbourne stood across the room, his presence a quiet counterweight to the spectacle. He did not approach at once. His restraint signaled respect. He would not appear conspiratorial. Yet his gaze met Clara's briefly, and in that glance lay unwavering assurance. The orchestra concluded a lively arrangement, and the murmur of conversation swelled. Edwin released Clara's arm and stepped toward the center of the ballroom. The movement alone commanded attention. His rising reputation had rendered him a figure of interest. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice clear and practiced, "I wish to address a matter that has recently attracted unnecessary speculation." Silence descended with startling obedience. Clara felt her pulse echo in her ears. This was the moment she had demanded, the crucible in which doubt would either dissolve or ignite beyond control. "My wife," Edwin continued, gesturing toward her with courteous acknowledgement, "has been subject to whispers concerning the child she carries." The words struck the air like struck glass. Clara held her spine rigid, refusing to lower her gaze. "I regret," he said, pausing just long enough to imply gravity, "that my own caution may have contributed to confusion." A flicker of surprise passed through the assembly. Edwin inhaled, and for an instant Clara wondered whether ambition would overrule honesty. "I affirm," he declared, each syllable deliberate, "that Mrs. Harrow bears my child. Any insinuation to the contrary is unfounded and unworthy." The room exhaled. Murmurs rose, not scandal now but recalibration. Clara felt the tremor in Edwin's voice, subtle yet perceptible. He had spoken the words, yet they carried the faintest echo of compulsion. Lord Ashbourne's expression did not shift, though a quiet steadiness seemed to settle over him. The declaration had been made. Reputation, at least publicly, was restored. Edwin turned toward Clara, offering his hand. Applause, tentative but growing, filled the space. She moved to his side, aware that eyes tracked her every breath. When she placed her hand in his, it was cool but firm. "You see," he murmured under the cover of clapping, "resolution benefits us both." Resolution. The word tasted hollow. Clara searched his face for remorse, for even the smallest trace of contrition. She found only calculation refined into concession. Before she could withdraw, a voice carried across the fading applause. "May I add," Lord Ashbourne said, stepping forward with measured authority, "that courage is most admirable when it corrects error without coercion." The remark was courteous, yet it pierced. Edwin's jaw tightened, though he maintained composure. "There was no coercion," he replied smoothly. "Then we are fortunate," Ashbourne answered. The exchange, though brief, reignited curiosity. Clara sensed the undercurrent shifting once more. Public affirmation had not erased the memory of suspicion. It had merely layered it with performance. She withdrew her hand from Edwin's and faced the assembly herself. The movement was small, yet it commanded attention more completely than any speech. "I thank you," she said, her voice neither trembling nor raised, "for your concern. I ask only that my child be welcomed without reservation." The simplicity of her request disarmed the room. It was not a plea for forgiveness nor a dramatic defense. It was a statement of dignity. Edwin glanced at her sharply, as though startled by her independence. For the first time, Clara felt no fear of his disapproval. The 5 words that had once shattered her now fortified her resolve. Music resumed hesitantly. Conversation returned, though altered. Some guests approached with renewed warmth, others maintained cautious distance. Reputation, she realized, was not repaired in a single evening, it was negotiated breath by breath. As the night deepened, Edwin drifted into discussions of legal reform, eager to capitalize upon restored credibility. Clara moved through the room with composed assurance, no longer shrinking beneath scrutiny. Each greeting she accepted with measured grace reinforced the truth she now understood. Her worth had never depended upon his endorsement. Near midnight, she stepped onto the terrace for air. Frost silvered the balustrade. The city lights flickered beyond the gardens like distant constellations. "You have altered the narrative," Ashbourne said softly behind her. She did not turn immediately. He spoke the words. "You demanded them." At last she faced him. The cool night air sharpened her thoughts. "A declaration born of necessity is not devotion." "No," he agreed. "But it is exposure." She understood. Edwin had been compelled to choose publicly between ambition and repudiation. He had chosen preservation of image, but the fissure within their marriage now lay visible to more than herself. "What will you do?" Ashbourne asked gently. Clara considered the question with unprecedented clarity. The central conflict had shifted. It was no longer whether society would believe her, it was whether she would accept a life built upon reluctant acknowledgement. "I will not remain where trust is strategic," she said at last. Ashbourne did not reach for her. He merely inclined his head as though honoring a sovereign decision. Inside, laughter rose again, brittle and bright. Edwin appeared in the doorway, his expression shadowed by something less certain than before. "Clara," he called, tone controlled yet strained, "we must depart." She held his gaze across the terrace. In that distance lay the entirety of their marriage, constructed upon advancement, sustained by appearances, fractured by 5 careless words. "I shall return momentarily," she replied. Edwin hesitated, then withdrew. Ashbourne's presence remained steady at her side. "Whatever path you choose," he said quietly, "let it be chosen, not endured." The frost beneath her fingertips felt sharp and real. She pressed her palm briefly against her abdomen, grounding herself in the life that had catalyzed this reckoning. "I was shattered," she murmured. "But I am not broken." "No," he answered. "You are awakening." From within the hall, the final strains of music swelled toward conclusion. Clara drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of decision settle, not as burden but as liberation. When she re-entered the ballroom, heads turned once more. Edwin stepped forward to escort her, expectation etched across his features. She met his gaze without hostility, without fear. "We shall speak tomorrow," she said quietly, yet with unmistakable resolve. He studied her as though recognizing, perhaps too late, that the woman before him was no longer governed by silence. As they descended the steps into the waiting carriage, the night air cut clean and cold. London's light stretched before them, indifferent yet luminous. 5 words had once sought to diminish her. Tonight, beneath brighter lights than any chandelier, she had transformed them into a declaration of her own. And as the carriage wheels began to turn, Clara understood that the true reckoning of her marriage had only just begun.